My name is Evelyn Drake, and the night my daughter collapsed at my door, I swore I'd make her husband regret the day he ever touched her. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it's reached. It was 1:0 inches the morning, the kind of hour when the town goes quiet except for guilt, regret, and the truth that finally claws its way out. I had just taken off my gun belt after a 14-hour shift. My back ached, my eyelids felt like lead, and I was halfway between dreams when someone started pounding on my front door. Not a soft knock, a scream wrapped in wood. My first thought, a break-in. My second, no, this is worse. I grabbed my pistol, crept toward the sound, but when I heard the voice on the other side, my blood froze. "Mom, please, open up." It was Grace, my daughter. When I swung the door open, she fell into my arms trembling, sobbing, her face so bruised it barely looked like her own. Her lips were split, her eye was swollen shut, her blouse torn at the collar. "Mom," she gasped between sobs. He hit me, because of her. Her. The mistress. The ghost that had been haunting my daughter's marriage for months. I carried Grace inside and laid her on the couch. The yellow porch light spilled across her skin, revealing every mark he'd left. And something inside me, something I'd buried after 20 years on the force, woke up again. The kind of anger that doesn't shout. It calculates. I cleaned her wounds in silence, pressing the gauze gently against her lip. The blood kept coming, red and raw, like the world refusing to forget what he did. When I lifted her blouse, I saw the bruise, deep, black, cruel, spreading across her ribs. That's when she whispered, voice trembling, "Don't call the police, Mom, please. He said if I talk, he'll take everything, the house, the land, even the car." Her phone buzzed on the table. I saw his name, Ryan Calloway, flashing like a curse. 7 missed calls. Then a text appeared. "Ryan, open your mouth again, and I'll finish what I started." I looked at that screen until my hands stopped shaking. And that's when I remembered who I was. I wasn't just Grace's mother. I was Sergeant Evelyn Drake, and I'd spent half my life putting men like him behind bars. That night, I didn't call for backup. I called my lawyer. "Tom," I said when he answered, half asleep, "start the plan. A pause." Then, quietly, "Are you sure?" I glanced back at my daughter, sleeping under a blanket, her face swollen, her breath uneven. More than ever, the line went dead. The vow was made. By morning, I was back in uniform, and the war for justice had begun. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the silence in my house felt heavier than thunder. Grace was still asleep on the couch, her body curled up like a child's, one arm hanging over the edge. The bruises on her wrist were darkening, turning from red to violet, the color of betrayal. I stood in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall, and something inside me hardened into steel. I'd spent 23 years wearing a badge. I'd seen men shoot, steal, and lie, but nothing compared to the quiet evil of a man who smiles while breaking a woman's bones. I walked to the hall closet and opened the door. My uniform hung there, pressed, waiting. The faint scent of starch and old resolve hit me. My service pistol lay beneath it, oiled and gleaming, the metal cold as purpose. I buttoned my shirt, tightened my belt, pinned the badge to my chest. The moment the clasp clicked, the weight of the past fell back onto my shoulders, familiar, steady, and dangerous. I wasn't just her mother anymore. I was the law she'd been denied. On the coffee table, her phone lit up again. A new message from Ryan. "Ryan, if you think running to your mommy will save you, you're dumber than I thought." I stared at the screen until my vision steadied. Then I picked up the phone, took a photo of the message, and saved it. Evidence. Next, I took photos of Grace's face, her wrists, her ribs, each flash carving truth into the silence. My hands didn't shake. They couldn't. I'd learned long ago that emotion clouds the shot. When I finished, I sat at the dining table, spreading the photos beside her hospital discharge papers. The clock ticked. My pulse slowed. The line between mother and officer blurred into one. Then I opened my laptop and began typing my report, not for the department, but for myself. Every injury, every threat, every bruise. Halfway through, I heard the creak of the floorboards. Grace was awake, her eyes puffy, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, what are you doing?" I didn't look up. building a case. Please, she begged. He'll come for me if you push this. I met her eyes. He already did. She flinched, tears gathering again. You don't understand. He's powerful, Mom. Everyone in this town. I don't care who he knows, I cut in. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the tone that once stopped grown men mid-confession. He laid his hands on you. That's all I need to know. Grace looked away, her shoulders trembling. I just want this to stop. It will, I said, but not the way he expects. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in months. Figueroa? It's Evelyn. I need those x-rays and the CT scan copies sent to my address. Yes, it's personal. Then another call. Tom Blake, attorney at law. Tom, it's me again, I said, voice steady. The plan starts now. Draft the protection order. I'll deliver the evidence myself. When I hung up, Grace was staring at me. Fear and relief fought for space in her eyes. What if he finds out? She whispered. I holstered my gun. Then he'll find out the hard way. The doorbell rang. I reached instinctively for my weapon, then saw Eleanor through the window, my next-door neighbor and oldest friend, holding a casserole in trembling hands. She stepped inside, her expression pale. I heard shouting last night. I didn't want to pry, but... She looked past me at Grace, who sat silently on the couch. Sweet Lord. That man did this? I nodded once. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She set the casserole on the table and pulled out her phone. My porch cam caught something around 1 a.m. You want the footage? My throat tightened. Send it to me. A few minutes later, the file arrived, a grainy recording of my daughter, battered and crying, pounding on my front door. Seeing it made my stomach twist, but I copied the file to a flash drive and slipped it into my coat pocket. Evidence. Eleanor placed a hand on my arm. You get him, Evie. You get him good. I nodded, my eyes still fixed on the laptop screen. I don't plan to miss. After she left, I sat at the table, staring at the uniform sleeve folded against my wrist. When I first joined the force, I believed justice came from rules, from procedure. Now, I understood it came from resolve, the kind that doesn't flinch when the world turns away. As the sun rose higher, I slid the flash drive into a small envelope, labeled it Case 27, Personal, and locked it in my drawer. Then I walked over to Grace, knelt beside her, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Get some rest, I said softly. I'll take care of the rest. Mom, she whispered, voice trembling. What are you going to do? I stood up, adjusted the badge on my chest, and looked out the window toward the street where Ryan's silver truck usually parked. Whatever it takes. The morning light caught my reflection in the glass, a woman calm, armed, and ready. The law had rules, but vengeance had timing, and mine had just begun to tick. By the next morning, word had already started to leak through Benton County. It always did. Small towns carry secrets like wind carries scent, invisible, but impossible to contain. I drove to the station early, my badge catching the pale light through the windshield. Every mile between my house and the police precinct felt heavier than the last. Not because I was afraid fear was a luxury long since beaten out of me, but because I could already feel the storm Ryan was about to summon. When I stepped inside, the chatter quieted. The kind of silence that means everyone knows something but pretends they don't. Morning, Sergeant, Officer Henderson said, half smiling, half watching me. I nodded, went straight to my desk, and slid a sealed envelope into my drawer, the flash drive with Eleanor's footage, copies of Grace's hospital report, and the printed text message that would make any jury's stomach turn. Before I could sit, Captain Miller's door opened. Drake, he called, a word. Inside, his office smelled of burnt coffee and old frustration. He gestured toward the chair. I heard about what happened, with your daughter. My jaw clenched. You heard fast. It's a small town. Word gets around. Evelyn, I know what it's like when things get personal. But tread carefully, all right? That man's connected. The Callaways have half the county's contracts. I'm not looking for trouble, sir, I said evenly. I'm looking for justice. He sighed. Just make sure those two don't end up the same thing. I left before he could add anything else. Back home, Grace was awake, pale, shaky, wrapped in one of my old flannel shirts. She was staring at her phone, unread messages flooding the screen. Ryan, you think you can humiliate me? Ryan, you're nothing without me. Ryan, delete those pictures before I make you disappear. Each message came faster, more frantic. I took the phone from her trembling hands. "You're not reading another one of those. I can't just ignore him, Mom. He'll come." "He already has," I said, and powered it off. Grace burst into tears, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than pain. "He'll destroy me, Mom. He'll turn everyone against me." I took her face in my hands, gently but firmly. "Then we show them who he really is." That night, I sat alone at the dining table, sorting through my evidence folder. Outside, headlights flashed past, too slow to be coincidence. I moved to the window, staying low. A silver truck. Ryan's. He parked across the street, lights off, engine idling, watching. For 10 minutes, he didn't move. Then the door opened. I saw his silhouette, tall, confident, that same swagger that once fooled my daughter into believing he was a good man. He stood there, staring at my house. Then, deliberately, he raised his hand and blew me a kiss. I didn't move, didn't blink, but inside, every nerve screamed for restraint. When he finally drove off, I sat back down and reached for the phone. "Tom," I said, keeping my voice level. "He's escalating. Did you call it in?" "No," I said. "Not yet." "Evelyn, I want him comfortable." I cut in. "Men like him make mistakes when they think they still own the room." There was a pause on the line. Then Tom said, "You've got 2 choices, law or war. Once you pick, there's no going back." "I already picked," I said. "I just haven't told him yet." That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid he'd come back, but because I wanted him to. I wanted him to see what he'd built. I wanted him to see what I was building in return. At dawn, I went to Eleanor's to pick up another copy of the porch footage, just in case. She was waiting at the door, her robe pulled tight against the morning chill. "He was out there again last night," she said. "Silver truck, parked right under the street lamp like he wanted me to see him." I nodded. "Let him watch. He's giving me everything I need." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Evie, he's dangerous. The kind who thinks power means impunity. Don't underestimate him." "I don't," I said quietly. "I've met too many men like him to forget what they're capable of." When I got home, Grace was sitting at the table, sipping coffee with both hands, like she was holding on to something alive. She looked up at me, voice small. "Do you think he'll stop?" I shook my head. "No, but I will." She looked down. "You sound like you're preparing for something." "I am." Grace studied my face, calm, composed, resolute, and whispered, "You're scaring me, Mom." I smiled faintly. "Good. That means you still believe in me." The clock ticked. The phone stayed silent, and I sat there, waiting for his next mistake. It wouldn't be long. Men like Ryan always return to the scene of their control. They can't stand losing it. When he did, I'd be ready. Because this wasn't just a mother's vengeance anymore. It was a professional correction. The following evening, a storm rolled over Benton County, the kind that strips leaves from trees and makes every porch creak like it's holding its breath. I sat alone in the kitchen, watching rain slash across the window pane. Grace was upstairs, finally sleeping after 3 sleepless nights. I could hear her soft breathing through the vent, fragile but steady. I told myself she was safe. For now. Then the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew that voice. "Evelyn," Ryan said, smooth as oil. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. "Come on now," he coaxed. "You don't want this to get ugly. You're a reasonable woman, law enforcement no less. You know how messy things can get when people don't cooperate." I pressed the record button on my phone and said nothing. He chuckled softly. "You think you're clever, recording me, right? That's cute." Still silence. He sighed, the mask slipping just enough for the venom to seep through. "Tell Grace to stop running. Tell her to come home. She's my wife, Evelyn. My property." My jaw tightened. "You just made your second mistake, Ryan." "What was the first?" "Underestimating me." Then I hung up. The recording saved automatically. I backed it up to a cloud drive under a name he'd never find. Case 27, dead calm. That night, I didn't bother to turn off the porch light. Let him come. Let him circle the block. The more rope he gave me, the cleaner the noose. The next morning, I met with attorney Tom Blake downtown at the courthouse cafe. The place smelled of bitter coffee and paperwork, the scent of bureaucracy and tired justice. He slid a manila folder across the table. Everything you sent me checks out. Medical documentation, video, text messages, and now the phone recording. We have cause for a restraining order and a criminal complaint." "Good," I said. "But Evelyn," he added, lowering his voice, "I got a tip this morning. Someone in the clerk's office says Ryan's been moving property titles around your family's old land, the one near Silver Creek. It's under review for transfer." I froze mid-sip. "Transfer? To who?" Tom flipped open the folder. A photocopy of the form stared back at me, forged signatures, mine and Grace's, in shaky pen. And under new owner, a name I hadn't seen before but instantly hated. Melissa Crane, Ryan's mistress. A slow, cold fury rose in my chest. He hadn't just beaten my daughter, he'd tried to steal her birthright, my father's land, my husband's memory, our legacy. Tom's voice softened. "You see why I told you to stay within the law, right? This is bigger than just domestic violence. He's laundering property through false signatures. If we move fast, we can trap him before he realizes we know." I looked up, calm but burning inside. "Then let's move fast." Before leaving, I stopped by the county records office myself. My badge got me inside without questions. The young clerk behind the counter looked nervous as I flipped through the file. "Who brought these papers in?" I asked. Mr. Calloway, ma'am, said you were too busy to come in." I closed the file slowly. "Did he now?" "Everything seemed in order," the clerk stammered. "I'm sure it did." I left without another word. Outside, thunder cracked above the courthouse dome, echoing through the wet streets. The rain had started again, harder this time. When I got home, I found Grace sitting on the stairs, pale but determined. She held a letter in her trembling hands. "It came today," she said. "From his lawyer. He's filing for spousal property control. He wants to declare me mentally unfit." I took the letter, scanned the words, and smiled without humor. Classic narcissist defense. Attack before you're exposed. Grace looked at me, her voice breaking. "Mom, he's trying to erase me." I knelt beside her, touched her bruised cheek. "Then we'll make sure the world remembers exactly who he is." That night, I went back to my laptop and compiled every document, medical records, messages, recordings, the video from Eleanor's porch cam, and now the forged land transfer. It was a digital fortress of truth, impossible to destroy. At midnight, I called Rosales, my old partner, and now precinct commander. "Evelyn," he answered, voice gravelly with sleep. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." "Depends on what you think," I said. "You're building a personal case, aren't you?" "I'm protecting my daughter." A pause. Then, softer, "You know I can't officially sanction this." "I'm not asking you to," I said. "But if things go south, I need a patrol car near Silver Creek, just in case." Rosales exhaled slowly. "You're walking a fine line, Drake." "I was born on one," I said, then ended the call. Outside, lightning split the sky. The wind howled through the oaks behind the house, rattling the windows like ghosts trying to warn me. Grace came downstairs, frightened. "Mom, did he call again?" "No," I said. "He doesn't need to. He already told me everything I need to know." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I looked toward the dark window, where my own reflection stared back, calm, cold, resolute. "He thinks he's untouchable." I turned away, locking the evidence drawer, my hand lingering on the badge pinned to my chest. "He's wrong." The storm outside roared louder, rain hammering the roof like war drums. By morning, I'd already decided. The law would take him down, but I'd make sure his pride went first. The trap was set, and soon Ryan Calloway would walk right into it. The rhythm of my days narrowed to a single, cold drum. Collect, protect, wait. Evidence became the only language that could be trusted. Paper and pixels did not smile, did not negotiate, did not soften the bruise into an anecdote. They simply were. They testified in ink and metadata. They did not have an opinion. They only held the truth until someone could read it aloud. Tom Blake met me at the courthouse again, but this time we sat in a quiet conference room with a wall of law books like a backbone behind him. Commander Rosales had supplied a uniformed officer to sit in the lobby during our meetings, a small mercy that felt like a broken promise kept. Tom tapped the folder in front of him, the copies of the forged deed, the timestamps, the county clerk's notes about who filed the paperwork and when. He looked up at me with a kind of tired approval. "You've done what most people can't imagine doing," he said. "You collected everything. The neighbor's video, the hospital reports, the photos, and now this." He spread a photograph of Ryan Calloway leaning toward Melissa Crane outside that cheap motel, his arm around her waist. The neon sign cast both their faces in a pink, ugly light. My stomach clenched at the sight, but my voice was even. He was careless. More than careless. He's arrogant. And arrogance, in the hands of men like him, is brittle. Tom smiled thinly. "We file the civil suit for fraud. We seek an emergency injunction to stop the land transfer, and the DA will take a look at the forged signatures for criminal charges. But the restraining order? Grace needs that now." Grace needed it more than she knew. She needed space to breathe, to relearn trust without looking over her shoulder every time a car idled too long at the curb. When we left the courthouse that afternoon, she walked a little straighter, like a woman relearning how to carry herself without the weight of someone else's temper pressing on her spine. Home, though, is never an island from the war. Rumor churned like a storm front in our town. Gossip is a faster tide than facts. At the farmer's market, a woman I'd shared a coffee with for 10 years lowered her voice when I passed and said, "You know, some of us thought you were using your badge for revenge." The gnaw in my throat wasn't anger, so much as the weary knowledge that truth must be hammered until the metal glowed, and even then, some folks would prefer the old story. That night, I sat with Grace at the kitchen table. The lamp made a small island of light. Outside, the world went gray and indifferent. She was fiddling with a loose thread on her sleeve. "Do you hate me?" she asked, without looking up. The question landed like a stone. I wanted to tell her that hate is a petty emotion reserved for the smallness of people, that what I felt was something cleaner and more fierce, an obligation, a love that had sharpened into a weapon. Instead, I reached across and took her hand. "Never," I said. "But I don't want your life to be paid for with your fear. That's not love, that's rent." She managed a small laugh that sounded like glass. Do you really think we'll win?" "We'll make him accountable," I said. "And sometimes that's the only kind of victory there is." Then Ryan moved. He sent a lawyer letter that afternoon, the kind with polite threats and legalese meant to sound inevitable. He accused me of interfering with family business. He accused Tom Blake of malpractice for orchestrating a smear. He demanded to be allowed to inspect the land documents himself. He demanded, in language that pretended to be caring, that Grace reconsider her cooperation with us. The letter clattered on my kitchen counter like the hollow thump of a gauntlet. I taped it to the evidence wall beside the neighbor video and the hospital photos. It joined the other ugly things, and suddenly the wall felt less like proof and more like armor. One evening, a thin, late light of winter, Denise Crane called. She used to be Melissa's name in my head, but when she sat across from me in the dim corner of a diner and nervously picked at the edge of a paper napkin, she looked smaller than I'd expected. Her mascara had run the way people's stories sometimes do when the truth seeps through. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Because why collapses the bravest explanations." She flinched. "He promised me a share. Said I'd be set. I was stupid," she whispered. "I thought he'd leave her. I thought I was the future. Then one night, he hit her and called it discipline. I told myself that wasn't what I thought. I was wrong." She told me about the bank accounts he'd brushed her toward, about how he'd coaxed her into signing papers in dim motel rooms, how he'd shown her the glossy photographs of the property and said, "We're building something." Her voice broke on the admitted part, that he'd shown her the signatures and asked only that she look the other way. "You could have walked away," I said flatly. She looked at me, the shame in her eyes like an apology. I couldn't. We struck a bargain there in the smell of coffee and grease. I could not offer her absolution, but I could offer safety and protection and a way to tell the truth without him twisting it into blame. In exchange, Denise agreed to sit with the DA and tell everything, every motel signature, the nights he'd left receipts in his pants, the bank transfers that led to her name. She gave me names, dates, faces. It was messy, and it was human, and it turned the case from a two-dimensional photograph into a moving thing. Not everyone is cut out for the courtroom. Some people crumble, some people go silent, some people become monuments. Denise, with all her mistakes, chose to climb up on the stand. I watched from the gallery as she described how Ryan had spun realities and how the forged paperwork had been executed. Her testimony was not elegant, but it was true in the way that truth smells like iron and grief. The DA leaned forward on his desk, the way a man leans toward a fire. The judge watched, bored at first, then focused, like a patient cat narrowing on a mouse. The day the injunction hearing was decided, cold sunlight carved the courthouse steps into hard white lines. I remember the echo of our footsteps, like a metronome for fate. The judge read the temporary orders. He froze the transfer. He prohibited Ryan from contacting Grace. He set conditions that would keep his hands away from anything he might think he could take. Outside, a cluster of reporters waited, their breath a fog in the air. Someone asked me a question I had been asked endlessly. Why did you do it the way you did? Why not hand it over to the DA and let them work? Because the system is a net, not a guarantee, I said. It takes time to mend nets. Sometimes you bail with your own hands. That night my daughter arrived at my door, and I chose then and there to bail. To me, that's not heroism, it's motherhood. The headlines the next morning were kinder than I expected. Local officer fights for daughter, one read. Land transfer frozen, crowed another. There was a relief in seeing facts print where rumor had once sown doubt. But relief is a thin coat in winter. It keeps out the worst of the cold, not the ache inside. We kept moving. The DA weighed the fraud charges as the domestic violence case grew into a public document with witnesses and timelines. Ryan's legal team filed motions and delay tactics, polite stonewalls intended to turn momentum into attrition. He had a lawyer who loved the smell of legal paper and the sound of appellate rulings like music. He also had a temper that was more dangerous than his lawyer's. One night, after a long day of depositions, I drove the back roads toward Silver Creek. The wind pushed the highway grass like a congregation of gray hands. I pulled into the empty lot of the family land and stepped out. The dirt felt like history under my shoes. My father's laugh used to carry across this field in summers that were simple. My husband's planting fingers had always found the soil like a promise. I knelt and let my fingers taste the earth. It was cool and honest and mute. You tried to sell it, I told the land out loud. In a private ceremony only the gulls and the sky could hear. You tried to let his greed become our map. It won't be your map. When the call came from Rosales an hour later, quiet, urgent, I heard his exhaustion. There's movement at the pawn shop, he said. They're talking reprisals. We'll put more patrols out tonight. I slept with the lamp on, listening to the steady breath of the house. Grace slept in the room next to mine, and if anything were to happen, I needed to be the watchman who did not look away. The law would do its work, so would I. And if the law stumbled, then there are other levers a person can pull: witnesses, timing, exposure. Shame, for someone like Ryan, is a corrosive solvent. In the end, legal victories do not erase the bruises. They do not rearrange the nights when a person wakes in dark and forgets for a moment where they are safe. What they do is rebuild borders. They restore the right to breathe in a place that is not terrorized by another's hands. That is enough to let a woman learn, slowly, that her body does not belong to anyone else. The week after the injunction, someone delivered a bouquet to Grace at work, wildflowers in a jar. No card, just color. She brought them home and set them on the kitchen table where they glowed like ordinary small miracles. We watched them open up, petal by patient petal. Maybe we'll plant something in the field this spring, she said, almost in a whisper, the way a secret hopes to be believed. Maybe we will, I said. And for the first time in months, the future felt like something other than a courtroom calendar. It was the end of March, when the verdict finally came down. The air outside the courthouse smelled like thawing earth and spring rain. But inside, everything was cold, steel, and silence. Grace sat beside me, her hands locked in her lap, her face pale but calm. She had learned how to wear courage like a second skin. Ryan stood across the room, his suit sharp but his eyes restless. He hadn't slept, you could tell by the twitch in his jaw. He didn't look at Grace, or me. He only stared at the judge like a gambler waiting for his last card. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors who had once whispered against us now sat in tense silence, waiting to see which story would win, his or ours. Judge Peterson cleared his throat. His voice was heavy, measured, final. After reviewing the evidence presented, including video footage, medical records, and witness testimony, The court grants a permanent protection order to Grace Calloway. Furthermore, the fraudulent property transfer to Melissa Crane is null and void. Formal charges for domestic assault and fraud are to proceed to the county prosecutor. Ryan's lawyer tried to stand, sputtering, "Your Honor, if I may," but the judge cut him off with a single raised hand. "You may not. Sit down." The gavel came down once, a dull crack that seemed to echo all the way back to that night on my doorstep when my daughter had collapsed in my arms. Grace let out a long breath, not a sob, not even a sound. Just release. Ryan turned, his eyes meeting mine. There was no apology in them, only disbelief. I leaned slightly forward and whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You should have stopped when you still had her love." He sneered, but his voice cracked when he said, "You'll regret this." "I already did," I replied softly. "For years." The bailiff placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him out. His cuffs glinted briefly in the light. The sound of those clinking chains, that small metallic honesty, was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. After court, Grace and I drove home in silence. The sky had turned amber, the light soft and strange, that in-between glow that feels like both ending and beginning. When we pulled into the driveway, she didn't get out right away. She just sat there, staring at the porch. "That's where it started," she said quietly. "That night, I followed her gaze to the steps where she'd fallen months ago, broken, terrified, bleeding. Now the same space seemed smaller, harmless, powerless. Grace opened the car door, took a slow breath, and stepped onto the porch. She traced her hand along the railing, as if reclaiming something invisible. Then she turned to me and smiled, not wide, not showy, but real. "I think I can finally breathe here again," she said. "You can," I answered. "Because now, no one else decides that for you." 2 weeks later, Ryan was in county jail, awaiting transfer to a federal facility. The fraud case had exploded into something bigger than anyone expected. 2 other victims came forward, both women he'd charmed, used, and discarded. The DA called it pattern behavior. I called it karma catching up. The newspapers ran his photo beside the headline, "Local businessman charged with abuse and fraud." Grace didn't read it. She didn't need to. Instead, she started working at the local youth center, teaching financial literacy classes to young women, helping them recognize warning signs she'd once ignored. She was finding her purpose again, piece by piece. As for me, I didn't hang up the badge. Not yet. But I learned that justice wasn't always a courtroom. Sometimes, it was the look in a survivor's eyes when she finally stopped flinching at her own reflection. On a soft Sunday morning, I drove out to Silver Creek Farm, the land my father had left us, the land Ryan had tried to steal. Dew clung to the grass, and the air was thick with birdsong. I walked the edge of the fence line, feeling the old boards under my palm. The soil smelled of rain and promise. For the first time in years, I let myself cry, not out of grief, but release. The kind of tears that clean rather than drown. When I got home, Grace was on the porch, sunlight on her face, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You were gone early," she said, handing me one. "I went to say thank you," I replied. "To who?" "To the land. It stayed when everything else didn't." Grace smiled softly, and for a moment, I saw her as a child again, before Ryan, before fear, before bruises and silence. "You think it forgives us?" she asked. "It already did," I said. "It's been waiting." We sat together, quiet, watching the morning unfold. The storm had passed. The house was still. And for the first time, peace didn't feel like surrender. It felt like justice finally exhaling. I'm glad you were here. If you've listened this far, thank you. Give this story a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because sometimes, stories like ours find someone who needs them most, someone still waiting for their dawn after a long night.